French politics is turning into a real merry-go-round, to the point of making Italy look like a politically stable country. You see, this guy here, Sébastien Lecornu, is the country's newly appointed prime minister, but he's already resigned. He did so just 26 days after taking office. He didn't even have time to collect his first paycheck as prime minister. Truly historic. Take a look.
Sébastien Lecornu led France's briefest government in over a century. The former defense minister spent just one-third as long in office as Michel Barnier in 2024. The last government that lasted so little was in 1924, under the Third Republic.
The new French prime minister lasted even less time than Liz Truss. Do you remember her? She was the first British prime minister to resign because the markets turned on her when she wanted to increase the public deficit. A textbook case of instant political death. Well, if that was dramatic, what happened with Lecornu is almost record-breaking. His two predecessors, Michel Barnier and François Bayrou, didn't last long either, but at least they managed to govern for a while. Not long, but they presented ideas and stood up for themselves. Lecornu, on the other hand, didn't even do that. He appointed his cabinet on a Sunday afternoon, and by Monday morning, he was completely out of the game. He didn't even get to deliver his inaugural speech to Parliament, because the new government he formed didn't even last as long as he did. Exactly 14 hours. Barely enough time to order a coffee and let it go cold. In short, a disaster. Which is nothing new. This is already the 5th Prime Minister of Macron's second term, and the 3rd since 2024 alone. So what does this mean? Well, it means that France has become an ungovernable country. And clearly, given this situation, and considering that we're already looking at the 3rd casualty in a tremendous political crisis, the question is what the hell is going on in France? Well, let's take a step back before we dive into the subject. Just a few weeks ago, Mélenchon's far left and Bardella's far right ended up voting together to bring down the state budget. The result? The former Prime Minister, François Bayrou, was out of the government. And now Lecornu is throwing in the towel and leaving before he gets kicked out. Let's see. France has always been a political powder keg. You've all seen it. If they have to take to the streets and burn trash cans, Parisians don't think twice. But what's happening now is in a different league. This is no longer just about protests. It's about genuine institutional paralysis. Even so, Macron is not giving up. He has convinced Lecornu, who's already resigned, to at least make one last attempt to form a government. Will he succeed? We'll see soon enough. But one thing is clear, whether he succeeds or not, France will continue to be in political chaos. And the most concerning thing is that this chaos is beginning to spread throughout Europe. Because yes, Germany is going through some serious bumps in the road. You've probably heard it many times. But France's situation is even worse. The German economic engine has been stalling for years, with flat growth and its industry in serious trouble. But at least they're keeping public debt under control at around 60% of GDP. France, on the other hand, ended 2024 with a 112% debt ratio. And for 2025, it's expected to go well beyond that. Worse still, while countries such as Spain, Italy, and even Greece have their accounts more or less in order, France is going in the opposite direction, stepping on the spending accelerator. The result? Growing mistrust in the markets and increasing fiscal unrest. So much so that headlines are already appearing such as this.
France has become Italy, and not in a good way. Macron, who refuses to step down as president or call another snap parliamentary election, presides over a political system in a state of paralysis and a country bracing for serious social unrest.
VisualPolitik community, this problem is not confined to France. The political instability in France could jeopardize the entire European project. We're not talking about a crisis as brutal as that of 2012, when Greece had to be bailed out. But we are talking about a serious deterioration that could be even worse in the long term. So the questions are clear. Why is France becoming the new Italy? Does Macron have any tricks up his sleeve to get out of this mess? Will France manage to form a stable government? Let's dive right into the political chaos in France. To begin with, and to help you understand the political chaos the French are experiencing, you need to have at least a mental picture of what has been happening in French politics lately. In fact, to understand why Lecornu resigned, we need to go back to 2017, the year Emmanuel Macron came to power. He was young, centrist, elegant, and reformist. The Leo Messi of European politics, or Cristiano Ronaldo if you prefer. And the French bought into the promise. His party swept the legislative elections with 350 of the 577 seats, an overwhelming absolute majority that gave him all the power. But every golden age comes to an end, and Macron's lasted less than a TikTok video. And the question is, why? Basically because his first major reforms, although well-intentioned, were not popular with the public. For example, he did things like eliminating the wealth tax on the rich, lowering corporate tax, and easing capital gains tax. At first glance, we might think, hey, not bad, right? Well, yes, but there was a catch, and that was in the fine print. Because all of those cuts cost the state 2.2% of GDP in revenue. And the problem is that this was not offset by lower government spending. And keep this detail in mind because it will be very important in a moment. So soon, the golden boy of French politics began to fall from his pedestal. Many began to see him as the president of the rich. Are you familiar with the yellow vest protests? Well, they were directly related to all this. Add to that the growing problems with immigration and Islamic radicalism within France's borders, which I'm sure you're all too familiar with, and the outcome was inevitable. His second term was no longer a sequel to the first. It was a completely different movie, and not exactly a successful one. In the last legislative elections, Ensemble, Macron's coalition, lost 105 seats. Quite a blow. But what was really striking was not only the fall of the president, but who took his place. On the one hand, Le Pen's National Rally, a type of alt-right, a nationalist right with social overtones, and on the other, the New Popular Union, a left-wing bloc as diverse as it is explosive, socialists, rebels, and even more radical factions. And yet, Macron held on, without a majority, and with headaches, but still governing. Until the real blow came. A blow that came from Brussels. The 2024 European elections confirmed what was already suspected, that Macron was no longer the favourite. Le Pen's party swept the board, taking 30 of the 81 French MEPs, and became the leading force in the country. The message was clear. Unless something big happened, the nationalist right was one step away from power. So, did Macron respond? He went for broke, dissolving the assembly and calling early elections. In other words, he did a Pedro Sanchez, but in French style. His goal was to stop Le Pen before she became unstoppable, and in order to do so, he hatched a tacit pact with the leftist New Popular Front not to compete against each other in crucial districts. It was a desperate move, but one that shows just how deep France has sunk into the real quagmire. The result? Well, you can see for yourselves, a mixed bag. First, the Macronist bloc collapsed. Second, Macron's party ceased to be the leading force in favour of the New Popular Front. And third, and the only good news for him, is that his goal of stopping Le Pen and preventing her from seizing power was achieved, although they did continue to grow. The National Rally won in votes, but the electoral system punished them by leaving them third in seats, when they had just swept the European elections. In short, Macron contained Le Pen's party at the cost of sacrificing himself. But was that the end of the game? Well, no, not so fast. As is often the case on the left, and not only in France, the New Popular Front soon fell apart. Mélenchon fell out with the socialists, and Macron saw his opportunity to form a grand national pact. A government of moderates composed of socialists, republicans, and with himself at the centre. The heirs of Holland, plus those of Sarkozy. But he messed up again. Instead of reaching out to the left, he appointed a right-wing prime minister, and you may be wondering, why? Was it pure political sectarianism, or was there something else behind that decision? Well, in a moment, you'll understand perfectly, but let's just say there were red lines he didn't want to cross. Not surprisingly, the socialists were angry, very angry. The situation was so fragile that the government had to activate the nuclear option, a constitutional article to approve the budget without going through the assembly. It's the same mechanism that Macron used to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, and make a note of this too, because it's going to be crucial to this story. The fact is that between resignations and failed motions, we have reached the final chapter. Sébastien Lecornu, a guy who tried to calm the waters. He promised not to use the nuclear option and presented a softer budget. He even gave up on suspending public holidays as his predecessor had proposed. But as you've seen, nothing has worked, and France remains ungovernable.
I was ready to compromise, but each political party wanted the other political party to adopt its entire program.
In the end, Macron has wasted his last bullet. Dissolving the assembly has been useless. However, he is not entirely to blame. Le Cornu has also failed. He promised to break with Macronism, build bridges, and form a stable government, but he ended up repeating the same script. Of the 18 ministers, 12 had already been with Macron. So, break with the past? What break? But do you know what's the most ironic of all? This time it wasn't the left that rebelled, but the Republicans, the moderate right wing that was supposed to support him. Take a look.
French conservatives brought about PM's downfall hours after pledging support. The appointment of two former members who joined Macron years ago provoked the party's ire.
The Republicans had been supporting Macron purely out of calculation. Being in government gave them the profile of a state party. Serious, moderate, just what they needed to differentiate themselves from the National Rally. But even they had had enough. It seems that the socialists weren't the only ones fed up with Macronism. And if you're wondering, no, Macron does not seem willing to ally himself with either the far left or the far right, nor does he need to. Neither wants to get close to a sinking ship. Because who would want to jump on a sinking ship at the last minute? Neither Bardella/Le Pen nor Mélenchon are in a hurry. On the contrary, if they get close to Macron, they run the risk of appearing to be complicit in the disaster. And they don't need to do that. They just need to sit back and wait for him to collapse on his own. Because, don't forget, in the next elections, the National Rally is the favourite. So, do you understand now why France has become literally ungovernable? Since 2002, only one Prime Minister has finished his term. The others not even close. And worse still, in Macron's second term, everything is getting worse. Many blame it on his ego, and yes, he certainly seems to have plenty of that. But there's another explanation for why he's so stubborn. Something that not only sheds light on France's political instability, but also explains why the country is turning into the new Italy or the next Greece. We are referring, of course, to the economy. Pay attention.
The real Sun King.
If we leave out very specific cases such as North Korea, some microstates, and petromonarchies, France is literally the largest state on the planet. And I don't mean that in a territorial sense, but in an economic sense. In total, the French government controls 57% of GDP. To give you an idea, in most developed countries that figure is around 40%, and compared to France, even the Nordic countries seem like liberal paradises. It's almost like a socialist economy, but dressed up in a tuxedo. In France, they don't decide how many kilos of sugar are produced per year, as in Cuba or the former Soviet Union, but what the French state does do is charge exorbitant taxes, and then redistribute that money as it sees fit. It also controls many private companies that, when it comes down to it, seem semi-state owned. Not even the absolute monarchies of France's past had so much economic power. Never before has the French state been so large. It's a veritable budgetary leviathan. And who controls this monster? Well, the answer probably won't surprise you.
In France, senior citizens are almost king.
That's right. In practice, France is almost a gerontocracy, a country designed by and for retirees. Pensions alone account for a quarter of the entire government budget, equivalent to 14% of GDP. This is a figure that even countries with much older citizens can't afford, and we're not talking about modest pensions. A French retiree receives, on average, 30% more than a British retiree, and does so for 25 years, 25% longer. Add to this healthcare spending, supplementary pensions, and special assistance for the elderly, and the total takes up another fifth of the national budget. And then comes the big question. How is all this paid for? Well, there is no magic when it comes to money, and the answer is simple. On credit. France is one of the countries with the highest taxes in the world, and yet its deficit is around 6% of GDP. And while it's true that during the pandemic many governments threw caution to the wind to save the economy once the emergency was over, almost all of them began to turn off the tap. But not France. Instead, France has stepped on the gas. For example, Italy has cut its deficit from 8% to 3%, but France has raised it from 4.75% to almost 6% in just 3 years. And all of this with an economy that is barely growing by a measly 1% in 2024 and is estimated to fall short of even that this year at just 0.6%. Textbook stagnation. But do you want an even more shocking statistic to understand this madness? 45% of the increase in government spending in France since World War II can be explained by one single factor: pensions. So, is this a generational war? Boomers against young people who are currently paying their pensions? Well, no. Nothing could be further from the truth. Because, surprise, young people are delighted with the system. Yes, the same people who complain that taxes are sky high also come out to defend retirement at 62 as if it were a sacred right. In fact, when Macron tried to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 using extraordinary powers, Paris burned. Literally. And who was setting fire to those trash cans? Well, spoiler alert, it wasn't 80-year-old men. So why are we talking so much about pensions? What do they have to do with the political chaos? Well, everything. Because here's the real sticking point. All parties want to maintain or even increase public pensions, all except one, the president's. And remember, Macron is no poster boy for austerity either. During his first term, he ran up the deficit, and in his second term as well. Now he wants to put the brakes on, but he no longer has that power. The intention to cut back is still there, and with it a host of unpopular measures that have no chance of going ahead. Remember the right-wing prime minister he appointed to build bridges with the left? Well, his budgets were tough, at least by French standards. A 60 billion euro reduction in the deficit, 20 billion in tax increases, and 40 billion in cuts. The result, the National Assembly rejected them, and with them the Prime Minister as well. The fact is that Macron had a window of opportunity to form a stable government, but he didn't trust the socialists to carry out the reforms he considered essential. Was it his biggest mistake, or an act of political conviction? Would it really have changed anything? Time will tell, but one thing we already know, uncertainty and paralysis are costing France dearly. Because the markets are not waiting, and the less confidence investors have in French politics, the more the price of its debts rises.
France's borrowing costs rise after Fitch downgrade, and there could be more bad news ahead.
As if the pension problem weren't big enough. Every day, interest on the debt eats up a larger portion of the budget. The situation is so bad that the French 10-year bond is now trading on par with the Italian bond, but with two differences. The French bond has a much stronger upward trend, and paradoxically, Italian politics under Giorgia Meloni currently seems to be at its most robust compared to France. In fact, Meloni is already the longest-serving prime minister since Berlusconi. During her time in office, Meloni has already seen 5 prime ministers in France. And everything points to there being soon a 6th. Will it last? Well, given what we've seen, I very much doubt it. No one in the National Assembly is willing to make difficult decisions, not even the Republicans, who in theory are further to the right than Macron, fully support the president's crusade. Macron is resisting like the Gaulish village of Asterix and Obelisk did against the Roman Empire. But resistance is not enough. France needs reform. And remember, not just any reform will do. Imagine this scenario. Macron dissolves the assembly. There are elections, and the National Rally sweeps the board. Imagine even that Macron resigns and someone close to Le Pen becomes president. Then what? Do you think the markets will sit idly by in the face of such a populist program? Could such a government withstand an economic earthquake? And if it ends up making the necessary reforms, will its voters stick with it? There are many questions, and most of them have no easy answers. But one thing is clear, it's difficult to be optimistic about France today. All that remains is to hope for one thing, that the French economy and institutions are strong enough to prevent this latest enfant terrible of Europe from dragging the entire continent into a new crisis. But now that we've come this far, it's your turn. What do you think Macron will do? Should he give up his crucial reforms in order to at least form a government with the moderate left, or is that simply ungovernable in a country as divided as France? Well, leave us your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start the debate. But first, if you like the video, don't forget to like it, and subscribe to VisualPolitik, which really helps us out a lot. As always, thank you so very much for being there. Best regards. See you next time.